how big a gap would you say, honestly? And I know you're very, very big, on Hakeem Olajuwon. How big a gap is there between Hakeem Olajuwon and Charles Barkley? How big? Because I would say the gap between Michael Jordan and Hakeem is bigger than the gap between Hakeem and Charles Barkley.
I disagree.
That's cool.
I won't.
I think Barkley is crazy underrated.
Well, here's the thing, Penn. When I think about Barkley, I think Barkley is more unique than any other player. I think we're more apt to see Olajuwon again, maybe in another 15, 20 years, than Barkley ever again. I don't think I'll ever see that kind of player again. But when we're talking about the gap between these two players, I think the gap between Jordan and Olajuwon, just from what they can produce, what Olajuwon does as a glass cleaner, as a defender, as an overall player, I think the gap between him and Jordan is closer than it is with him and Barkley, because I think he does far more than what Barkley did. Far more.
Yeah, Penn, I'm not gonna lie, like, this isn't even a conversation like that should be being had. I think it's easier to put Kareem in Jordan's tier than it is to put Hakeem in Jordan's tier than it is to put Charles Barkley in Hakeem's tier.
So where do you have Barkley all time? You're talking about him like he's a fringe top 75 guy.
No, we're not doing that. Nope.
I had him as the 7th best power forward. So,
but Penn, he's not a fringe top 5 guy. Which if we were to do top 5,
Hakeem is a top 5 guy.
He's a fringe top 5 guy. Absolutely. Like if we were to do our top 5s, and Penn, if you were to come up here and have Hakeem 5, I'd be like,
we actually doing that tomorrow.
Chill has him at 9, right? You have him at 9 all time, Hakeem.
Chill. Oh, we are doing the centers list tomorrow. Huh?
I think it's just.
I thought we were talking about the centers list when you said top 5.
Oh, I mean, the centers list.
Championships, man. It's the championships. If and a lot of that comes down to luck. A lot of it comes down to luck. It comes down to 1 inch.
Yes, it does. Yes, it did, Ron.
No, okay. So chill.
I mean,
you're right.
A certain number 23 playing.
Yeah, all chips come down to luck.
No, but Mars, he was favorable because one guy left the league. But
I ain't even knowing that.
He was also unfavorable because another guy left the league who we just talked about, who was drafted #1 overall before him. So if Ralph Sampson stays, how many chips? And I asked you guys this, and I didn't get an answer. How many chips does Hakeem have?
It's a lot of luck. That's what I'm saying. I don't.
Okay,
for me, the Hakeem thing for me, in '86. For me, the Hakeem thing is not about rings, whether he had 0 or 2. Like,
well, yeah,
I don't rank from that. Yeah. I just think there's a large gap between Barkley and Hakeem. 0 rings. If Barkley had 2 and Hakeem had 0, I mean, I'd like to think I would feel the same way. I think Hakeem clears, but Barkley was great. I just think Hakeem is clearly better.
I think you guys talk a lot about the fact that Jordan wasn't in the league during that time. I don't think that was the issue. I've said this to you guys, and Penn, I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, but in addition to it being luck, teams duck smoke all the time. And it's not a coincidence that in the 1993-94 season, who did Denver beat in the first round? Seattle. They own Houston. Goodbye. They own them. How about the next year? I'm sorry, Ron. How about the next year? Who did the Lakers beat in the playoffs? Seattle. They own Houston. The next year in 1996, the back-to-back NBA champion Houston Rockets. Who do they play in the semifinals? They play the Houston Rockets. Sweep them out the playoffs. Goodbye. Mop them right out the playoffs. And by the way, that's the 6th time in 8 years that they had beaten them in the playoffs. They own them. So the fact that they avoided them, you guys talk a lot about Jordan. No, they were able to avoid the Seattle Supersonics. So those championships, that's when you talk about luck. Those championships were, in some aspect, lucky because they were able to avoid the Seattle Supersonics.
You're right.
I mean, the playoffs has always been matchup dependent. That's why I say. I mean, you guys hold these rings in such high regard. Like, unless you play every team in a series, like, are you really the best
for a
team?
sizable amount in the '90s? Honestly, I thought Charles Barkley was the 2nd best player in the league for a sizable like 6-year gap in the '90s. I thought it was Jordan and then it was Barkley, and that's how I felt. I did not think Kareem. I did not think Hakeem was the 2nd best player behind Jordan.
He wasn't better than. I'll give you 93.
Okay, let's try a little pop quiz. No, it's just to put this on for size.
Sure.
Joe, who do you think was a better rebounder per 100 possessions between Charles Barkley and Hakeem Olajuwon?
We know this. Barkley was a better rebounder per 100 possessions in terms of numbers. Yeah.
So how does he clear? Their scoring stats are almost identical.
Because
Barkley was more efficient. Barkley was more efficient, and he scored just as much.
And one is one of the most egregious defenders I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
He's not one of the most egregious defenders. He wasn't a great defender. Fine.
He's one of the more egregious defenders I've ever seen.
We're still talking about two guys who both won MVP once. We're still talking about guys who have relatively even accolades minus the 2 rings. And I'm just saying,
was Charles ever the best player on the planet? Was that ever a
neither was
conversation?
Hakeem was the best player on the planet.
MJ was still the best player. He was just playing baseball as well.
That's exactly it.
In 1995,
that's what he's about to say.
The best player in the NBA. The best active player in the NBA.
I was about to say,
let's
Ron,
not do that.
Let me rephrase that. Was Charles Barkley ever considered the best player in the NBA?
For me, he was the best player in the NBA.
When was he the best player in the game?
When Michael Jordan retired.
In 94.
I thought Barkley was the best player in the league that year.
I mean, he just said there was a 6-year stretch. He thought he was number 2, so I don't know why you had to surprise now.
Right. But
he thought he was number 2, and he's saying when MJ wasn't there, I thought he was number 1. That's the same thing as him saying he thought he was number 2.
He was still number 2, Boris. He was still number 2.
I'm just saying, honestly, we underrate guys who didn't win a ring. That's all I'm saying. We underrate guys who didn't win a ring.
Well, winning does matter when you're talking about being the best, though. Now you can play at that level, and I won't discount that, Penn. You can definitely play at that level, and that does matter. I won't discount that, and you do need a lot of luck in order to win NBA championships. However, what you produce within that luck also matters. So we're talking about Olajuwon at that time, who was elite as a rebounder, just like Barkley was. He was elite as a scorer in the playoffs, better than Barkley. He was a clearly better defender than Charles Barkley was. In addition to him being clearly a better defender, don't leave out the fact that he went up against Barkley not once, went up against him twice. Barkley had him in the sleeper and let him up, and he choked Barkley out twice. I like to think that matters, because if we had that today,
he was a better offensive player than Charles Barkley. I'm sorry, he was a better offensive player than Hakeem Olajuwon by far.
I could get with Hakeem Barkley being a better offensive player.
He was better at pretty much everything. He was a better shooter. Okay. He was a more efficient post scorer. He was more dominant. I mean, we're not talking about a gap of we're not talking about a gap of well, how do you define dominant, man? Because if we're talking about two guys who average the exact same number of points per 100 possessions throughout their career, but one guy is shooting 7% better from 2, I would consider the guy who's shooting 7% better way more dominant. Now you might say, well, Hakeem was triple teamed and double teamed. Well, who told him not to pass? Number one, and number two, Charles Barkley wasn't getting single coverage in the post. They were throwing doubles and triples on him too. So I'm just saying, for a guy, it's just a beef of mine that I think certain players get underrated because for one reason or another, like the media didn't like him or whatever. Barkley was just not like
darling. Let's kill that right now. Charles was a media darling. The media loved Charles.
Yeah, but now you got Shaq who clowns him every time he doesn't have a ring.
Well, that's who he is. He's the
I do think that stuff, but that stuff plays subconsciously.
And also, I just want to say, like, the weight gain, right? The fact that when you gain weight and people kind of hold that against you, like, oh, you weren't professional, you had weight problems, you didn't weigh him properly, right? So I'm just saying, like, I think like at his peak, like the best version of Charles Barkley is like a top 10 player in the NBA. You say he didn't
all time.
Yes, the best version of him. Now you can say he didn't stay there long enough, he didn't win long enough, or whatever. But I'm saying, like, if I take every player in their prime and I do an all-time draft, the best version of Charles Barkley is a top 10 player of all time.
Barkley or Jokic?
Jokic.
Barkley or Steph?
Okay, top 15. Can we go top 15?
Yeah.
We go top 15. Okay.
There we go.
Jokic is crazy, but
top 10 is asking a lot. But the best version of Barkley, like you just said, in the post, like nobody would question whether or not Olajuwon was better on the box than Barkley. I don't think anybody would question that. Barkley was more brute force than he was anything else in the box. Olajuwon was more versatile on the box. He had more moves on the box. He could step out and knock down the 12 to 15 footer. Charles could shoot that too, but it was different with Olajuwon. Olajuwon could put the ball on the floor in the mid post, get to the rim, and he had different counters than Charles Barkley. That's just offensively as a scorer. I'm not just talking about overall offensively. He would get off the basketball, right? He would get off the basketball when he was in the post. He did know how to throw out of a double team. But when you're talking about getting the ball to a guy on the block, getting the ball to a guy in a one-on-one situation, whether it's in the mid post or in the mid range, Olajuwon was better than Barkley in that area. I think Charles. I'll give you the edge with Charles in transition with the ball. I'll give you the edge with him with the ball because I think Charles was better with the ball in transition because Charles was faster. But Olajuwon was a deer as he ran, and I think the separator is on defense. I don't think it's close.
The defense is not close. I'll give you that, but I want to say the offense is not close either.
I
right.
don't think so,
and you bring up counters, and he had more of a bag. Well, I could say Pau Gasol had a deeper mid-range bag than Shaquille O'Neal. Doesn't mean Pau Gasol is better than Shaquille O'Neal. Doesn't mean he was more efficient than Shaquille O'Neal. If you can't stop my main thing, if I put you on the block and I just get into the rim and I'm shooting 58% from 2, and you can't stop that, I don't need all that other stuff, right? And I think a lot.
Neither did Olajuwon, only except he just had it and used it. He didn't need a lot of that other stuff. He just had it and used it, which made him even more effective. I think that's the difference here. I mean, Barkley, again, they made a rule for Barkley with dribbling the ball 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times because he was holding up the game. Olajuwon wasn't doing that, and that was more effective for the Houston Rockets than it was for Phoenix, for Philadelphia. I think that the edge with Barkley in transition is him with the ball. I will give you that. But Olajuwon was fantastic. I don't think it was that close. I don't think it was that far when we're talking about a transition player. And I clearly don't think about when we're talking about being on the box. I don't think that I don't think that Barkley was that much better, because also when you talk about Barkley, I don't think you take into account Barkley was the kind of rebounder who offensive rebound a lot. So he was getting a lot of putbacks. So those buckets that you're talking about, there were a lot of stickbacks. It wasn't just throw the ball into him and him get a bucket. That was more Olajuwon, where we throw the ball into him and we get a bucket.
That's fair. But I'm saying, like, in his prime, that was like a point forward. He was a guy who he could handle the ball. It was like LeBron, man. That's the type of athlete he was, in my opinion. He just, if LeBron ballooned up and was 3 inches shorter, that's Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley is a generational athlete.
He's what Mars talked about. He's what Mars talked about, where when you saw Ralph Sampson, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, what's going on? I like what I'm seeing, but this fat guy who runs like they're like, what's going on here? This doesn't make sense when I'm watching. That's what
we're not going to see another
Charles Barkley didn't make sense to me either. Yeah, he's another weird one. Shout out to him. Very, very good player. No Hakeem, but very good player.
It's the player choice way. Yeah, them boys don't get it started. The player choice way. You're the player choice way. Come and switch lanes into the player choice way.